Center to bring open dialogue to the Pacific Northwest. Yeah. And she'll tell you more about herself in a moment. And this is John Herold, who has been with Rethinking many times and is a delight, and we adore him. And he's up in the, where do you live?
Gig Harbor, next to Tacoma.
Gig Harbor, next to Tacoma. These people came all the way down from there, and is a process worker, and is a systems changer and shaker-upper and magician. Yeah. And so, the two of you, I will let you all introduce yourselves more. Thank you so much.
This is Alita Taylor. Alita recently got married to Fletch Taylor. Alita and I have been working together for about a year on an open dialogue team in Tacoma, and we've had some experience working with families in distress, particularly families where there's an extreme state, or what we might call like psychosis, where there's someone in that family is experiencing a reality that's different from maybe the one that you and I are experiencing. And it's been a real delight to work with you. I am a beginner in open dialogue. I do not I haven't taken the training yet. There's a training coming to Tacoma that starts in February, and I'll be there. So I've been learning from this lovely person here. And yeah, I'm just so excited. Alita came from Santa Barbara and landed in Tacoma, which is like my backyard. I was actually prepared to go to Europe to do an open dialogue training. And then open dialogue came to Tacoma, so I'm still sort of pinching myself as to what that means. But yeah, it's a real special friend of mine, and I'm just so excited to introduce you to so many of my friends. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Wow. How are you doing?
Frazzled.
Yeah, I know. I was watching you, and we've been working on this slideshow, and this is a really funny thing. I have never used a slideshow. I have everything right here. And so you worked so hard to make it, and I think it's fine. I think it's great, because look at all these people here that are going to listen to us, and so, we'll just put the slideshow on whenever it happens.
It'll probably come on at just the right time.
Yeah,
right?
I was thinking that too.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I can feel that you're frazzled.
Yeah, but I feel a little less frazzled in the moment, just being able to talk to you about it.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I'll share a feeling, and then I want to share it with everybody, actually, that I had just a little moment ago. I'm going to get a little bit back to it. I felt this kind of warmth, and I felt like I was going to start crying, because I have felt quite isolated as, I'm the only one that I know of in the U.S. that has had this training in Europe. It took 2 years, and I went 8 times, and learned all these amazing things, and it turned everything as a psychotherapist for me, not just upside down, but twisted it around, and I felt like I finally found the way that I wanted to work. And so to see a room filled with people this interested in learning about this gave me this real feeling of connection, and this is what I've been wanting to do, for the last 2.5 years since I first learned about open dialogue, was to bring it to people. So I've been working pretty hard at it. So I heard an hour-long little talk. Nick Putman from the United Kingdom came to a retreat I was at Esalen, the R.D. Lang Symposium, and I learned how they practice mental health crisis and ongoing care in Western Lapland since the 1980s. And basically, that is what open dialogue is. It's the system of mental health care in Western Lapland. It is also a set of principles that I'll talk about that actually were not started out that way. They were developed from retrospectively looking back at what they were doing in Western Lapland to reduce hospitalizations and neuroleptic use and disability and unemployment. So something that was made and then implemented. It was actually something that emerged from wanting to do things differently, which I think is pretty important. All right. Okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the history. And here is my very first notes that I made about open dialogue at that retreat that I was just telling you about. That's my chicken scratch. I found that and I kept it. So this is one of those old Viking boats that I saw when I was visiting Norway, actually. And this is kind of how I felt when I was getting on a plane to go there, because I feel like nobody knows this way of treatment. And I was imagining being a Viking and being told, like, can you just open that boat and see what's on the other side of the ocean, you know, in this cold weather. And that's sort of how I feel now, bringing this way of mental health care here, or trying to. Currently, I work in a clinic that's fee-for-service in Tacoma, and nobody there knows how to work this way. I met John actually at the very first network meeting that I was asked to do for somebody in Tacoma who was in crisis, and I was found by a nurse practitioner there who had a residence, basically, of different people, and he was in crisis, and she asked me if I would do open dialogue and what I knew about doing it at this residence. And so I created a network meeting there, which I'll talk about in a little bit of what that is. So that's how I met John. And I also am married to a psychiatrist who he calls himself my student. And so, anyway, the first network meeting in Tacoma was me and John and Fletch, my husband, who was pretty much quiet the whole time, as a community member, the roommates of the person in crisis, the house managers, I'll call them, for the person in crisis,
The nutritionist.
The nutritionist, and later on at another network meeting, there was actually a homeopath, naturopath doctor there. And so for about 2 hours, we met, and John got to feel what a network meeting was like. And then John and I and Fletch started to meet with a few families at our clinic, and it's been pretty complicated because the clinic doesn't really know what we're doing and why we're, meeting at the same time and who are these people, but it's been amazing. So let me tell you about the principles of open dialogue. So there I am on the plane. Oh, this is just me at the train stop. It was really cold, and I just wanted to put this in here. This is what I did every day for 5 days a week, waiting for the train. Okay, so I already talked about immediate help, and by the way, I'm going to repeat this, that these principles were developed by Jaakko Sekula, a psychologist nearby Tornio in Jyväskylä, the University of Jyväskylä, who was involved in training a lot of the staff at Chiropodist Hospital in Tornio. And the reason why he came up with these principles was in studying retrospectively what the staff in the mental health system were doing. They found that these were the guiding principles that of the way that they were working, that they still are committed to working with these principles, okay? So one is immediate help, and I mentioned the movie, and you may have remembered in the documentary that was made several years ago, that they always answer the phone. So the guidance is that if somebody's in crisis, whatever diagnosis they have, whatever is going on, even if they don't have a diagnosis, they know they need help, they're asking for help, they don't get like bounced around and waiting for appointments and things like that.
very foreign. So immediate help could mean a lot of things, but that's a general principle. It may mean that they get to their home within 24 hours. It may mean that they have an appointment in the clinic within a couple of days. It may mean that they need hospitalization, lots of things. The second principle is family social network perspective, which means that in the immediate help meeting that they set up with team members that includes more than one clinician, the social network of the person in crisis and the family members are invited to that treatment meeting. And social network could mean anything. It could mean the coffee barista, it could mean the minister, it could mean friends, it could mean relatives or neighbors or people in their life that they want included in their care. And the family as well. And when I say treatment meeting, I also mean network meeting. So in open dialogue, there is no separate treatment planning meeting that takes place separate from the patient or the client or the person in crisis, or the person in need. And there is no separate meeting that takes place away from the family or the social network. The network meeting is the treatment meeting. It's one and the same. The third principle is flexibility and mobility. So that means that if the family is difficult to get to and it's really far away, it's up to the mental health staff to get there. It means that they are flexible with time. They don't say, well, we meet once a week. They say, when would you like us to come back? They say, would you like us to come to the home or would you like to come into the hospital? And they prefer to work in the people's home, actually, for multiple reasons. One of the reasons is they want people to not associate having to come into the hospital for help. They want to focus on their needs and strengths and building, whatever they need in their home. It may mean even something as simple as having a nurse spend the night in the home with the patient if they're suicidal. They have variances in what they can do with different staff, and that's what they aim to do, is to be flexible with what the family needs. And this principle comes from Tom Anderson's need-adapted approach, and he was one of the early psychologists that was involved with the development of this way of working with people. And I'll talk a little bit more about his involvement with how he developed reflections, which is a process in the network treatment meeting that, John is familiar with how that works. We'll talk about that a little later, but that's basically when the providers talk to each other in the meeting. In other words, well, I'll just explain it now. So I don't know if anybody remembers from psychology class, like, where you learned about this one-way mirror where, like, the experimental psychologist would look in at the family and, like, watch them interact with each other. You know what I'm talking about? So Tom Anderson said, why don't we just take this mirror away and see if actually people want to listen to what we say to each other. And so there's also a way that I have learned is a very important way to provide reflections. And I'll talk more about that. And the fourth principle, this is very, 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 very relieving to me as a clinician, is responsibility. This principle means that everyone is responsible. New concept. It's not the doctor, it's not the family, it's not the police, it's not the hospital, it's not the family, it's like not just the friends, it's not just the patient, it's everybody. So that is a guiding principle throughout the treatment, that there's shared responsibility for decision making, for the way and how often treatment happens for, you know, the use of medication, anything that's needed. It's very flexible. And the fifth is psychological continuity. And this means that the team that showed up for the immediate crisis remains the same throughout treatment. They don't get bounced around to different levels of care and all that stuff. It's the same people that meet with the family and the patient throughout the whole course of treatment, which could be 6 months, it could be a week, it could be 18 months, it could be 5 years. So that's what they aim to do, is to have psychological continuity. And tolerance of uncertainty. This one is a constant reminder that we don't know the answer. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's best. And the word dialogue, philosophically, actually it comes from Mikhail Bakhtin, who was a philosopher and social constructivist and originally a literary critic. A lot of his ideas were taken on by a lot of the social constructivists and therapists, social psychologists in the 60s and 70s, and numerous other, you know, clinicians like Bateson and all other people that started to think this way. Dialogue means that the meaning and the answers do not come from one person. They're not even the sum of pieces. Answers come from the sharing the space in between. And I'm going to actually skip to this slide, and I'm going to come back. And actually, that's the next one, dialogue and Polyphonic. So I'm going to, oh, that's exactly where I am. Look at this. I kind of know what I'm doing. Okay, so do you guys like a little philosophy, just to know where this comes from? Is this interesting to you? Okay. So Mikhail Bakhtin, it's really interesting too because of the Soviet Union, like a lot of his stuff like didn't really get out there for a while, and they've recovered like essays and things like that you know, were not in line with exactly what they wanted the public to know for a while, but eventually, you know, they found this paper or essay on critiquing Dostoevsky's literature, but the concepts are these, okay? One is that the self is unfinalizable. So I'm just going to read this. Individual people cannot be finalized, completely understood, known, or labeled. Though it is possible to understand people and to treat them as if they are completely known. So that's a paradox, right? It's both. He considers the possibility that a person can change and that a person is never fully revealed or fully known in the world. The unfinalizable self. The second concept, relationship between self and others and other groups. Every person is influenced by others in an inescapably intertwined way. I love that word, inescapably. Like, you guys are all part of me right now. You cannot get away from it. Consequently, no voice can be said to be isolated. His philosophy respected the influences of others on the self, that not merely in terms of how a person comes to be, but also in how a person thinks and how a person sees him or herself truthfully. So it's kind of inextricably connected. Just exactly what Grace was saying about community. This is the third concept. This gets me so excited. I'm sorry I'm reading from this, but it's just so connected to why I love this work. So, and after this I'll stop reading. So the polyphonic concept of truth is the next one. Polyphonic means many. He criticized the assumption that if two people disagree, at least one of them must be in error. He challenged philosophers for whom plurality of minds is accidental and superfluous. Truth is not a sentence or phrase. Instead, understanding is a number of mutually addressed, albeit contradictory and logically inconsistent statements. Bear with me, this is getting really good. Understanding needs a multitude of carrying voices. It cannot be held within a single mind or be expressed by a single mouth. The polyphonic truth requires many simultaneous voices. Bakhtin does not mean to say that many voices carry partial truths that complement each other. A number of different voices do not make the truth simply averaged or synthesized. Rather, it is the fact of mutual addressivity, of engagement, and of commitment to the context of a real-life event, like someone having a mental health crisis, that distinguishes understanding from misunderstanding. So, analyzing this, I kind of came up with my own little, to, summarize this. This is kind of an important aspect that I believe that open dialogue is not reproducible, it's not reducible, and it's not repeatable. So we can't take a syringe and put it into Tornado snow and bring it over here and put it into Portland or Tacoma. That's kind of a nice concept, but that's kind of what, we think we're doing with science with pills and things like that, and that doesn't really work. So I think it's important to know the roots behind why this work works. And it's really because of the present moment and because of other people. And so this is what it's not to me. This is my opinion. So this is how I do it, and this is what I aim to do. Instead of try to repeat or implement or make a program or make a movement or whatever. My aim in the room with someone in crisis and with the social network and with the family is to reflect in myself for the moment, to resound what I hear, and I don't say repeat because sometimes it's a sound, an utterance, a voice that just kind of like a feeling, like an emergence. Sometimes I just can feel somebody with a resonance, so that's resound what I hear. And I aim to reform what I understand. In other words, as soon as I hear somebody saying whatever it is that's in the past history of my symptomology, oh, these are, bipolar symptoms, oh, that's the psychotherapy training that I've had, I'm always reforming my understanding as everyone speaks. And the meaning kind of gets made on its own, mysteriously. And I'm always having to reform what I understand, moment to moment. What's next? Oh, this is a little breather. I'm going to bring you to Helsinki for a minute. So I got really close to these 18 people from all over the world that I took this training with. And it was Kathy's birthday, and we were having dinner at this restaurant across from this church. And these hot air balloons were going by. And I was like, Kathy, come look at the hot air balloons. And we ran from the restaurant to try to get a picture. And they're floating away, and that's me and Kathy in front of the church in Helsinki. But yeah, they moved by the time we ran outside. So,
but it's still visible in the upper right.
Yeah, it's still there. You can sort of see it. But anyway, I just thought this would be a fun time to share some of these little slides. And then they threw me a hen night, which is when I was getting married, and so this is. These are my colleagues. So I'll say a little bit about what they're doing around the world. So Judith on the right is from Sydney, Australia. Yasmin, next to her, is in UK, and in the UK, they're actually in the middle of doing a study, a long 18-month, I think they just got approved for 3 years, in several trusts, which are counties all around the UK, and they have teams actually doing this, actually responding to crisis this way. And there's also the treatment as usual counties are still getting the regular response to psychiatric crisis, but Yasmin is one of the team leads for one of those trusts in Kent, actually. And Lisa is right there. She is a psychologist from London. And Anni is from Tornio, Finland. And Pina there is from Italy. So we also had students from Germany and Japan and Austria. Housing, jobs, and healthcare. Well, oddly enough, Tornio is one of the poorer parts of Finland, Western Lapland in general, which is part of why they started to work this way, because their hospital was overflowing. So they were forced to do something different because they were running out of money in the late 70s, 80s. So before this system of care existed, they just started to experiment. They started to be flexible. They started to bring in different trainers from different areas and learn how to do things differently. They started actually meeting together as a group and do trainings all together, meeting nurses and psychiatrists together and occupational therapists, and they started to go to the home to respond to the crisis instead. So it was over time that, and they said they made a lot of mistakes because I actually listened to all of them talk to each other. There was a meeting in August and they were all saying, gosh, we really made a lot of mistakes. Remember when we started to go to houses alone? You know, and that was a mistake. And then they would talk about what didn't work. And so Western Lapland is the only place in Finland that has psychiatric care like this. The rest of Finland is just like here. So, you know, their coding is probably not as strict, I don't think, but I don't know much about it. But I do know that one of my colleagues came to take the training in Tornio and is a psychiatrist in Jyväskylä, and her team that she tries to work this way is accused very often of doing illegal things, you know, like, you know, this isn't the way that is empirical, what is that, evidence-based, whatever. It cracks me up, evidence-based practice, because open dialogue has been studied more than any other treatment for psychosis, and the results are actually very, very good. So it's very interesting that the evidence-based practice is not really practiced. So these are the elements. I kind of touched on some of them. So there's always more than 2 clinicians, 2 or more. Always include social supports. They use open-ended questions. In the interview or in the meetings, the responses use the actual words of the clients rather than rewording what they say. They use their own, you know, because you change the meaning when you start to say, oh, so you're really sad about that. No, I didn't say that. They're very careful about that. They focus on the present moment and attune to nonverbal communication. They engage all the participants and elicit multiple perspectives, and they emphasize the relational perspective in understanding to the current situation. Normalizing verbal and nonverbal communication, including expressions reflective of psychosis, is meaningful. So sometimes what is often called psychosis is a lot of silence, a lot of looking, a lot of nonsensical words, and the goal is not to get the person to make sense. The goal is actually, there is no goal. The goal is actually the dialogue and being with. So the actual words and experiences and expressions of somebody even having psychosis are simply accepted. So there's no real goal to get the person to be another way, their normal way. Can you think of an example that we did in surrounding this?
Of just like somebody doing something unusual and us just kind of
In our
hanging out with it?
sessions,
Yeah.
in our sessions.
Oh, sure. You want a specific example?
Yeah, can you think of one?
Oh, sure. I mean, I can think of someone who was like eating clay, and he had a wound on his body, and he was taking powdered clay, bentonite clay, and putting it on his wound, and creating a lot of dust, eating the clay, making everything be just so. He was definitely like acting in a way that's probably different than we would sort of normally expect, And the thing that I remember was just this completely non-reactive atmosphere. Just like, oh, yeah, that's what he's doing. Instead of like, wait, he's got to stop. Like, let's cut this out. He needs to act the way that we're acting. I just remember it was actually really relieving to not feel that pressure, that there were like professionals in the room who were sort of using their power to insist that somebody behave like they do. And I just didn't feel that at all. It was really relieving to not have that around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'd forgotten about the clay. So there's, this is another intermission. Okay, so I got to go to my daughter's favorite thing that she was really looking forward to going. I did a trip with my daughter next to one of these trainings because she graduated from college and she wanted to go to Scandinavia. So her favorite author was Hans Christian Andersen, and she really wanted to see The Little Mermaid. And so we traipsed through the rain and everything and tried walking to find it. It's not right in the center, it's, you know. So we get there, and she was so excited to show me. She was telling me starting to tell me all about the story about France giving the Little Mermaid statue to Denmark and the meaning behind that. And we were just looking at it in our rain jackets, and then all of a sudden, this woman from, I think she was from New York, nothing against New York, but these buses were coming from behind us, pouring out. All these people, and this woman said, "Are you done?" And we were like, my daughter and I looked at each other like, you know, we came all this way on the couch this moment with my daughter looking at The Little Mermaid. We hadn't even taken out our cameras yet. But anyway, so I backed away and I took a picture of this scene of all these pictured people getting their portrait taken with The Little Mermaid, because I thought that was actually funnier than, I don't know, it's one I would like to share more than the actual picture of The Little Mermaid, was everybody trying to position. And so I kind of think about that as like somebody in a mental health crisis, like, you know, like, are you done being depressed? Are you done with your, you know, you're out of the emergency room now, you're out of the hospital now, you know, like, are you done? It's like, we're in the moment. We don't know it's done, right?
Also thinking of a family that we worked with where we're really just being in the present moment. We're just absorbing what's happening, and at the very end, someone in the family said, well, what's next? What do we do next, you know? And we were like, well, there isn't. And that took that person a little getting used to, that maybe there wasn't like this concrete goal that we were headed to, and instead we're just sort of mining the moment for all that it can offer us. And that's not a different way of thinking.
Thank you. I remember that. Like silence was hard for them, I think. And I had to get used to the silence. I really did. It was hard to not go, okay, so how is everybody feeling? You know, it's like, well, if you wait long enough, people will actually start to talk with each other in their own family. And they might have a lot to say, and they might know them a lot better than I do. In fact, they do. So another one, explore a narrative of what has occurred rather than focus on symptoms. So they're using the language of what's actually happening, what are the events that have happened, not so you've been depressed, you know, or something like that. They talk about what's actually going on, not a symptom. And then here's the reflections thing. So, I might have a lot of things in my mind that I want to say and think about what I see, interactions or something like that. I don't pipe in and start sharing all of that. Like, I'm not there for them to see how, like, good I am at analyzing things or something as a family therapist. That's something that's kind of, I learned in school, that you can kind of analyze, and they're the identified patient, and they're the scapegoat, and, you know, all that stuff is way back here now, and I don't have to worry about it, and I really love that. It's very relieving to actually just listen. And, you know, I don't need to name what's happening. And so what I learned to do was to hold those things and bring myself back to the moment. Hold those things, bring myself back to the moment. And at some point, after lots of conversation, and I instruct the families that I'm not going to do a lot of interrupting. And I say, you know, I'll just let, you know, you guys have your time. And by the way, I always start every session with, so how would you like to use this time? Because it's their time. And what is important to the family and the social network and the client is the most important thing, not my risk assessment or my, you know, notes that I have to take. So the reflections are when sometime during the session, not very often, but I might have a feeling or an occurrence that happens that I want to share, and so I turn to John and say, you know, or first I'd say, is it okay if we have our little reflection right now? And then everyone's quiet, and then John and I have a conversation about my feelings or your feelings, and we explore that. And then we don't say a whole bunch, and then we go, so how was that for you? And then it goes on from there. They could go on to something totally different that had nothing to do with what we said. And that's great, because they're having an experience. They're having their own thoughts, and we don't know, you know, what was important to them. Only they do. And so that's what a reflection is. All treatment planning decisions are made transparently, engaging the network in shared decision making. So one thing that's kind of interesting, sometimes my husband, who's the psychiatrist, you know, the father will start like handing over, you know, like paperwork from somewhere to him, and, you know, they'll start saying, well, so what about the lithium? Should he be lowered on the lithium? And Fletch loves to, he loves these kind of sessions because he gets to be a completely different psychiatrist than he has ever experienced, because he gets to step back and kind of go, well, I don't know, let's talk about that. You know, and he looks around at everybody else, and, you know, he doesn't have to be the one that is like the expert with the prescription pad. And so I think that this method of way of treating people is going to be quite popular once they learn about it, because his experience has been that he gets to share responsibility. So, and then the team creates therapeutic space that tolerates uncertainty, letting understanding unfold from multiple perspectives, allowing for natural resolution when possible, and moving slowly to the diagnostic paradigm. So it's not like a diagnosis-free system, you know, they still have to use that. here and there, but that's not the focus. It's actually less important than the actual conversation. And tolerating uncertainty is very important because that's how more possibility happens. This is actually where the science of interpersonal neurobiology meets psychotherapy, because the plane of possibility of what has happened in our development in our nervous system up until now, and the possibility of neuroplasticity of how we relate to other human beings in our lives and how those significant experiences can change us, is actually given a framework to be practiced instead of one. You know, I have a picture of my office in here because I decided after learning open dialogue that I'm getting rid of my couch. I'm a psychotherapist without a couch. I only have chairs in my room. So a lot of times I get referrals for individuals because this isn't really a thing yet, and I have mostly see individuals, and they come in and they go, where do I sit? You know, but then they learn that they can invite their family and they can invite their friends if they want, and that happens because they see all these empty chairs. So I'm just building it and they will come. Yes? Are there differences if there is self-harm or dangerous behavior? Well, I wouldn't say there are differences, but they take everything seriously. So if it's the responsibility of, you know, the family and the doctor and the hospital to keep the person safe, that's part of the treatment. So in Tornio, they do actually still have some compensatory situations, compulsory situations. So they're actually the thesis that my colleague Yuri Taskula is doing right now, who's a psychiatrist at Chiropodist Hospital, is trying to reduce the number of what is that called when they have to give you a shot? Injection, compulsory injection, but there's another word. But
Chemical restraint.
Chemical restraint, yeah, that's it. So it does happen, so, I mean, because there are safety situations. But what he has found, he's been interviewing all the staff there, he's found that a lot of times the staff are maybe more afraid before they have to do that the person's afraid, and that fear has a lot to do with what ends up happening. And so I think that tolerating uncertainty has to also exist when there's dangerous behavior. Yeah. The needs of the patient change. The needs of the client and family change all the time. So what's available to them might change, what's, you know, provided might change, but typically what the research shows is that when people got this treatment, they needed less of it over time, less use of the system over time, less neuroleptic use in general. There's a 19-year study that just came out, statistically significant lower use of neuroleptics, lower hospitalization rates, lower unemployment and disability allowances. So that means an average, I think, of about, I think it's 18 months of use of services, but that could mean, you know, all kinds of different treatment. I don't have a clear answer, but you could read the study. I have the reference. It's not actually printed till next month, but I do have the reference of what you can look up the abstract. In fact, there's my office. John, do you want to say something about what these meetings have been like for you?
Yeah, there's more chairs in this office than are in the camera, and so I know the first time I walked into that office, I was like, whoa, there are a lot of chairs here. Like, where am I supposed to be? You know, there are a couple points that are kind of on my heart right now. So I had this big extreme state 6 years ago, and I thought I was the next Dalai Lama. Okay, so I got into that same Jesus Christ kind of mind state, and yeah, you know, if I had been asked to sit still in a network meeting, I don't know about that. You know, like I was very, very animated. But I distinctly remember there were a few times where I was in this really florid state and I would actually meet someone who would say, "The Dalai Lama, huh? Okay, what do you got for me? You know, like, what do you have to tell me? You're the Dalai Lama, great, like, what's next?" And I just remember that when people would accept that role that I was kind of in, I distinctly remember that the alteredness would actually come down. Okay, so when I was acknowledged as, wow, you feel like the Dalai Lama. I agree. Like, wow, look at you. There's something in me that actually felt a lot calmer around that, and that's like when we were talking about a slow route to the diagnostic kind of framework. When I walked into the ER, I think it took about 5 minutes for me to end up with a piece of paper that had my name on it, and on the top it just said, manic. And so they jumped to the diagnostic framework right away, and I really appreciate this kind of slower approach. Yeah, well, I like to say I'm not bipolar, I'm John Herold. And bipolar to me is an adjective, not a noun. Okay. And so there was a time in my life where I was kind of bipolar. You know, my life was bipolar, it was up and down. But do I experience those ups and downs today? I don't. And I don't take psychiatric medication. Okay, so interesting, that's not the route for everybody. But you know, another thing that's kind of on my heart right now is I'm thinking about the different roles of the so-called clinicians in our open dialogue meetings. I don't really think of myself as a clinician. I'm sort of straddling two worlds of being the experiencer, peer, voice hearer, and yeah, maybe I went to graduate school, but I don't have a license. So we have moments where Fletch is talking lithium, and you know, I don't really like lithium. So we have moments where we really have very, very steep differences in opinion. And I'm not a prescriber, okay? But Fletch actually honors my opinion. There have actually been a couple times where he said, you know, we're talking about the person who's taking lithium. Not behind their back, by the way, because remember, nothing about us without us, okay? So there's kind of an application of that there. But we were talking about the lithium withdrawal, and then he looked to me, and he said, "John, I could really use your help right now, because you have lived experience withdrawing from some of these drugs. Can I just ask you a question there?" And that was so validating for me because I was honored for the lived experience that I have. That was huge. So you know, we're talking about the medical model being present, you know, kind of the psychiatric mode being present, but I want to say that I don't think that it's the only answer. And like, personally, yeah, I do have kind of an anti-psychiatry feeling in my own history. And that attitude is welcomed. And I don't really sense that there's like a difference in power between me and Fletch, even if he's a prescribing psychiatrist and I'm an experiencer. I really don't get the sense that like his opinion in the end is going to matter more than mine. And that's huge to me.
So I started to talk a little bit about research. Does anybody want to know about research? Okay. Okay, so one thing that's important that I learned from a lot of the clinicians in my class was that the work that they have done in other countries, we can learn from. And this is a timeline of one psychiatrist's experience bringing the ideas of open dialogue into a hospital that she was actually the medical director in. And she started in 1994, starting to have network meetings. They're called NAT there. In 97, they were still doing them. 2006, I think she was able to do more of them. 2009, so in 2009, she's this bottom-up, top-down thing that she talked about, that A bottom up is where the change, kind of like how it developed in Tornio, the change of what they wanted to do for, you know, people in crisis, and they managed it from what they thought. They weren't like, you know, given this mandate from a law that said, now you are doing open dialogue. You know, like, now this is CBT for psychosis, and here's the manual. So that's bottom up. So then there was kind of a top-down in-house training that went on in 2011, and then there was research interviews, and then this is today in 2018. And she has been struggling to kind of keep the interest around this. And her advice, and the other, sorry, this is making noise, and two other clinicians from Italy and Germany both said something really important, and they interviewed all of the staff that they had been bringing open dialogue to, that if you don't have the infrastructure for it, you know, over time, it's just kind of one of those things that people get excited about, and then, you know, treatment as usual. So if anybody here is interested in pursuing policy making or writing people about, you know, looking at the research and things like that, I think it would be helpful. There are a lot of research well, I won't say a lot, but several going on right now in the UK and in Italy. In fact, the one in Italy is the next slide, I think, that I think will give it a lot of legs. So here's the one study going on. I can't put this up here for too long. We'll have to black it out later or not put it in because this isn't published yet. This is just, he gave us the 6-month results. But basically, it's going to be for 2 years, and he gave the 6-month follow-up. Fausto Mazzi is his name. And so he's doing a comparative trial between 2 different areas in Italy. And these are some of the results that he is showing statistical significance between the open dialogue treatment and the treatment as usual. And what he's measuring is the GAF, their level of functioning, and their hospitalizations, and where's the other thing? I don't think that's on there. I didn't bring all of his slides, but there's a lot of information coming that and also the thing that he said was that the nurses really appreciate this treatment, and he enjoys working with his nurses that he didn't used to do before. So, and then here is the 19-year outcome study that I just talked about earlier, if you wanted to take that down. And this is a really big deal, by the way. Really, really big deal. And this is coming out next month. Very, very huge. So, let me just see what else I got. These are my friends from Tornio in the snow. And Yuri, Emily, and Judith. And there's me in the present moment. That's my next slide, guides to the present moment. But really, this is more descriptive of how to be in the present moment. Like now. So this information comes from Jaakko Sekula, who was the psychologist who basically to dedicate his life to studying what they were doing in Tornio, and then they developed the open dialogue principles. But guides to praying and staying in the present moment, to prefer themes of the actual conversation instead of the narratives of the past. So in a session, I might be more like, so what are you feeling right now as you talk about this? What's coming up for you now? As opposed to, you know, so what happened last week? You know, you guarantee a response to spoken utterances that are embodied and comprehensive. So that is, you're there and you're listening to everybody, and you know, are responsive to the real stuff, that thing that you know that is a thing. I don't know how else to describe that. But when John notices that, he says, ooh, that felt really alive to me. I've heard him say that before. You note different voices, both inner and horizontal. So the voices inside and the voices next to you, and you listen to your own embodied responses. So it's actually really a relief to be a human being in the room. Between the dialogue between the family members, the members in the network.
Okay.
And then the inner voices of their inner voices. And then 3 more, take time for reflective talks with your colleagues. And I talked about what a reflection is. And speak in the first person, like I speaking from the I, you know, instead of you, I saw you. Proceed peacefully. Silences are good for dialogue. Sorry. And then this, just another little piece of life in Finland is a really cute little boy with his goat. Isn't that so cute? I love their little hats. The fashion there is very interesting.
I'm slowing down. Could you go back
Silences are good for what?
Good silences are good for dialogue.
Okay, so I come from a tradition of process work, and process work is all about like getting in there. You jump in and you work with what's alive. And okay, so you get in there, you jump, you engage with what's happening. And in open dialogue, it's kind of a different posture. And so I'm finding myself kind of sitting back and not wanting to jump in so much because I'm such a talker. But like if I jump in and I talk and I give my perspective, then what am I doing? I think I'm actually inhibiting the silence. And isn't the silence where the conversation actually kind of germs from amongst the group that's actually there? So for me, it's actually been kind of a pretty big learning in myself of learning that like maybe I'm not going to improve the situation by jumping in and giving everybody my opinion, but instead maybe it's better to step back and actually just let what's going to happen. And that's been like an interesting learning. Yeah.
Dialogical utterance. Yaka loves the word utterance. It's his new favorite word. And actually, when he described this in September, I think I saw him give this slide. I remember specifically, he's the psychologist that has done a lot of the research. He immediately said, when a baby is born, it doesn't have the language that we do. It just moves in some way that just towards the light, towards the sound, towards the mom's voice, and there's an embodied thing that comes from the sense body that is before the word, and that's what most. I'm sure you've learned that. We say that most communication is nonverbal. So when you have a family in the room, they're saying all kinds of things all the time. So that's dialogical utterances that are coming from their selves.
Organic.
So, yeah, it's here. It's something. It's paying attention to the real stuff.
Like non-verbal
expression.
Nonverbal expressions and being with, it could be so small. It could be so, like for example, I'm thinking of one of our clients who does this a lot in the session. And remember you are talking about? I remember John going, so I saw you move back when, your mom was talking about that. John said something like that. And, he was communicating. So that's kind of what that means. So you want to see the boy goat? He's so cute. So this is the son of this woman that specializes in adolescent dialogical work, and it was amazing hearing her because she's doing amazing work in the middle of Finland. She runs a residential center for foster kids that nobody else takes, and she does it all differently. They're assigned adults right away, and they don't have special meetings behind an office. They actually deal with all the problems right there as they emerge, and they might have a treatment meeting right then and there in the living room when something happens. And she's all about love and, you know, not hugely about, I mean, boundaries are important, but, you know, she invites the family in right away, a lot of times when that's frowned down upon in that whole field. So anyway, Tanya Piljoha, that's her son. And isn't that beautiful snow? Look at those trees. And you might think you have to go to Finland, but this is actually Washington. So you can come to Tacoma next year. From Tornio to Tacoma.
Tell us about the training.
Yeah, so that's a little Moomin troll. The Moomins are from Finland. Okay, so the training is, I have to fill it with 18 people. We could have as much as 36. There will be, if there's 36 people, there will be 4 trainers, 2 from Finland, from the UK, myself. Nick Putman is the one that has the most experience with Open Dialogue Foundation training, which is the year-long training. There's 4 weeks split apart by a few months, and it's Wednesday through Sunday, basically 8:30 to 5 are the hours. Within the training, there will be, you'll learn how to do a network meeting. You'll learn some of the important, you know, tools for what I just talked about, implementing them. The way that the training is done is unlike anything I have ever experienced, and I've taken a lot of trainings, because the reason it takes so long is because it's not like this. It's not like somebody talking at you. I mean, there is some lecture, but the training takes place in small groups where you actually get supervised, and you get to have reflecting teams, and you bring your work to the small group by video. I videotaped my work and brought it to Helsinki and showed it to my little team, and then I got a lot of feedback on the work. So it's very, and in fact they worked this way in Tornio from way back when. They would always videotape their work and show it and be wanting to, you know, make it be better clinicians. So there is some of that, and there's some family of origin work, which is, you know, very safe and structured, but I think it's an important part of being aware of ourselves. And the website.
There.
Oh, how did you?
Oh, I did.
Oh, you did it. Oh. Thank you. So, what happened to the chicken bouillon? Did I even explain that?
No, I don't know how to explain that.
Oh, we did, okay. The chicken bouillon was just a little way to explain that it's not reducible. This is not, you know, I mean, chicken soup, you know the difference with a real chicken soup with a real chicken carcass and flavoring from real chicken, and you know a chicken bouillon soup. It's just different, right? I mean, we try to put things in jars and pills and say this is how you do it, but the best is when it's handmade with your human instrument. This is my best instrument, you know, and you all have one, and so you can be human and do open dialogue, I have no doubt. But it is a lot of work, and it's very rewarding. This has been really fun. I really appreciate you wanting to know all of this, and I get to share what I'm doing. And if I had more time, I've had all these other ideas of breaking you guys up into groups and practicing reflecting and all that stuff, but it's not long enough to do that. Yeah, I could come back and do that. I'd be happy to. So is that enough?